We're here in Washington, D.C., doing Young Turks interviews. We got another great one for you guys, Governor Gilmore. He was governor of Virginia. He was also the chairman of the Republican National Committee, ran for president, and he joins us now right here in Washington. Thank you, Governor. So mainly, Governor, I want to talk to you about your campaign for president, and then I'd like to get a little bit into your thoughts about what's happening today in the race, Trump and the others. And then if we have time, we'll get into policy as well, which could be interesting. Okay, so let's start with your experience in the campaign. So you were number 17, right? There were 17 candidates, and I sense this. I don't mean no disrespect to you here, but I sense that you got disrespected by the rest of the media, whereas even when they were doing the smaller debates, they didn't even consider having you on. And I'm wondering why you think that was, because it was a bit of a mystery to me. Because here you are, a former governor, former head of the RNC. So why would the RNC discriminate against you? So what in the world happened that they just didn't really give you a chance?
Debates were very vital, and they were part of a matrix and a construct that actually had a big effect on my candidacy and others as well. And I was one of the 17. I was not number 17. I frequently showed up in the polls ahead of some of the other candidates and frequently beat them in some of the polls. But not all the polls. Bottom line was that we're at a new day in America that is a sudden intersection in the political process of the primary structure, which means high publicity in order to achieve recognition in the general public in order to participate in a primary. The Republican National Committee outsourcing the debate structure to the national networks. So they decided what polls to use and what invitations to extend. And then the third piece is the absolute tremendous power of the television media in this country, and particularly the evening shows and the evening cable news shows. If you put all these pieces together, it's an entirely new political realm, and it's perfect for somebody who's very high profile, highly entertaining, very, very rich. When they put it together, they didn't expect it to happen, but guess who it was perfect for? Donald Trump. Yeah. So but let me hasten to say, I was on two of the debates, Cenk. I was on two of the debates. I was on an early debate where I think I established myself, and then I was absent again for another 4 or 5 or 6. And then I was invited back by Fox News into the Des Moines debate, and I believe I won that debate. By all outside reports, I won that debate. I knew what I wanted to do, and I think I achieved a great deal. Began to pick up what they call Gilmentum.
So that's the part I find fascinating as to who's making those decisions, right? Because, and I think you partly answered there, that the RNC and the Republican Party has handed it off to the media, because it's so critical whether you get invited to those debates or not. And beyond being invited to the debates, there's this intangible feeling that okay, Jindal's a real possibility, but Pataki maybe not. And I don't know what they base that on. Pataki was governor of New York, right? And so governor of a blue state who was a Republican, why is he less credible than Jindal, who I found to be completely not credible? So how do they make those decisions?
Well, to explain it, it's really still in a couple of ways. Number one, we don't know who was making decisions, and that for your viewers ought to be a real problem. That means that some nameless, faceless producer in the back studio someplace in one of the cable shows was making the decision without any input from anybody else. And he was making that decision based upon who was going to draw the most attention for the better show to sell more television advertising. That's not the way that we want this democracy to work. And then the second thing is, if you have a lot of money, if you come into the campaign with a giant sum of money, really rich people backing you and putting in a lot of money, then at that point you can buy advertising, or you can build a organizational structure, or you can do things that are very high profile, or set up a big rally, which then the television people say, well, that's entertainment. Let me go and cover that, and then let's see who the most flamboyant speaker is and the most insulting, and then all of a sudden you got good TV. I'm telling you, good television is today governing what is going on in the political system.
Okay, see, this is exactly why I wanted to talk to you, because this is very interesting stuff. So let's expand upon that a little bit. You mentioned the donors there. To what degree, because the donors, as you say, give you power. You can put it on bigger rallies, you'll be taken more seriously by the media, et cetera. So to what degree do you think the donors are controlling the Republican Party at this point?
I don't think that's really the right question. I believe that donors have been controlling the political process for quite a long time. But this is not a matter of somebody saying, well, we're going to use you as a puppet on a string. It's not exactly like that. Donors are very peculiar animals, though. They really are hard to persuade. This is not that easy to do. And when they give the money, they have to really believe several things. They either have to be true believers because of an issue that you're carrying, but more likely they're trying to play the horse race. They want to see who they think has the better chance of winning. And so then they'll put in this money. But I don't want to underestimate what the money's for. It's not to buy a person's opinion or a person's issue. The candidate uses that money in order to make himself a more viable candidate. For example, Ted Cruz right now is reaching out and trying to get delegates in the state-by-state grassroots politics. That requires organizers who are paid. This is the kind of thing that we're talking about here. These rallies, I've thought about those a lot. You now see that they're the coin of the art. Trump actually initiated these. But now you see Hillary Clinton doing it. It's always the same. You got a backdrop of young people carrying signs that say crazy things or the name of the candidate. You think that stuff just magically appears? That stuff is by people going out and making phone calls, doing door-to-door, reaching out to people, creating lists, buying lists, emailing to people, regular postage mail to people. All that costs an enormous amount of money.
Right. And there are two different types of rallies. There's the Bernie Sanders ones that, yes, have some element of what you're talking about, because you'll see the Sanders signs. Anytime you see a sign for a candidate that's pre-made, you know some money was involved, right? They organized it. They printed those. They gave it to the supporters, right, which Bernie does, right? But beyond that, it's far more organic, right? And I think, as much as I have great disdain for Donald Trump, I think his rallies are more organic. Whereas the Hillary Clintons and the Ted Cruzes and the studied politicians, that feels a lot more, I'm going to bust people there, I'm going to do, and they have good organization, but it requires a lot more money to get those folks at those rallies and organized.
It's true that a candidate who is ideological, who has a philosophy or a policy position that is attractive to people, will enable them to bring in more people. But at the end of the day, the public out there still got to know you're there, you're coming, how they can get a ticket, how they can get in, what the hall is all about. You can't just do this stuff out on a street corner. You've got to hire a hall, and I can assure you nobody gives that stuff away for free. So look, I'm not trying to be a populist here, okay? I guess so. Maybe sometimes I am. I'm not trying to make excuses either. I'm just trying to explain to your viewers how all of this fits together. But you cannot underestimate the confluence right now of some historic trends that have come together and are intersecting right now. The primary system has been underway for a long time, since the first years of the 1900s with Theodore Roosevelt. It's been there a long time. But you know what? It makes great television. Every Tuesday night, the networks are on saying, and now we're hearing from southern Iowa and Sioux City, and here's the vote that's coming in, and this is it's great television. So now instead of having 4 or 5 primaries, you have 20 or 30 primaries because you got more TV election nights. This is the example of entertainment through politics.
Right. Who would have thought Southern Iowa would be so entertaining? But there's a tremendous amount of truth to that, and a lot of it does circulate around the media and TV, because even the money in politics, a lot of it goes to television. And so that seems to be the central spoke in a lot of ways, or it used to be. Now new media is becoming a factor in that as well. So, but those two factors you mentioned, television and the donors, is it hard not to get seduced by that? Did you guys have a conversation? Well, look, Jesus, we're not getting the coverage. Should we do something to get the coverage? We're not getting the donors, and obviously the donors are having a big effect, right? Should we do something to get more donors? Did you guys have those conversations inside your campaign?
Sure, but the problem is that what I was trying to be, Cenk, was and this was maybe a problem. I'll just once again point it out to your folks. The theory of the Gilmore campaign was that I was better prepared to be president than any of the other 17. In fact, any of the other 19. Now, I'll admit that Secretary Clinton has a lot of credentials, but that's not the only thing, as I would point out. But I have credentials. I'm a former elected prosecutor, attorney general, governor, chairman of the Republican National Committee, United States Army intelligence veteran, chairman of the National Commission on Terrorism for the United States of America. These are the credentials that I had on the policy area that the other candidates just didn't have.
You were the only one to serve in the military on the Republican side.
One of three, but I was the last one standing, yes. And I cared a lot about the veterans issues, and I was a veteran. And then, so the theory of the Gilmore campaign was credentials. And then, in addition to credentials, what I wanted to do for the United States of America, the kind of direction I wanted to take the country. And these things didn't resonate quite as well during the campaign as some other factors. Being explosive, being outrageous, being entertaining, being a part of the theater. But I want to remind you, not one more time, to put on good theater requires money. So you've got to be able to have the cash to present the kind of theater that attracts the kind of attention. Furthermore, it's another issue that I'm going to point out really quickly. If you have the bank account, you're taken seriously by the national press. If you don't have the bank account, they just don't see any way that you're going to be able to run a high-intensity theatrical campaign, so they stop paying attention to you. They don't care about the credentials of the issues as much as they obey your ability to actually put the money together to campaign.
That seems to have happened on a number of occasions on both sides. Buddy Roemer in 2012 on the Republican side, very similar issue. Said he was going to raise small donor money, and the media said, that's it, you're eliminated. You're not going to be in any of the debates, and we're done with you. And in the beginning, they weren't taking Bernie Sanders very seriously because he didn't have the big donors. And then all of a sudden, he started getting all these donations from all across the country. And since he got money, they had to take him a little bit more seriously. So given that dynamic, what does it take to get the money? So what is it that the Cruzes and the Rubios and the Bushes of the world did to get all that donor money?
Well, that question reminds me that money alone doesn't do it. Jeb Bush had all the money in the world. He started right out of the gate. His theory of the campaign was, I got the name and I got $130 million. Nobody's going to be able to match that, and I'm going to blow the race open and walk away with it. Well, it didn't work. Even money was not good enough to promote that candidate. Carly Fiorina had, I think, as a personal fortune of $75 million, and she was prepared to spend it on her campaign. Even that didn't do the trick. So it's not all just money. You have to have money to get through the gate and to be able to show everybody and to actually be able to communicate appropriately to your viewers and to people everywhere that are listening to politics. But it isn't that alone. You also have got to have the right message. And that's a place, frankly, where Donald Trump has succeeded and has done well. And Bernie Sanders on the left side has had the correct message for the more left-leaning people over on the Democratic side, which I can't stand, but he has succeeded.
Hopefully we'll get to that in a minute. And we'll get to Trump in a minute as well. But let's just finish this thought real quick. So, of course, especially in a presidential race, money alone doesn't do it because there's so much free media. There's so much spectacle that television is covering. So Donald Trump can get enough free media to overcome Jeb Bush's $130 million advantage. In fact, I think Jeb Bush is in some ways a case study on how much money in politics works. You'd think that's ironic or counterintuitive, but he, as we saw on the national stage, he's actually a miserable candidate, which makes me think that he won those races down in Florida with money, right? Money, name recognition, enough in a backwater place. And I know Florida's a large state, but in terms of national politics, not a lot of attention, not a lot of free media. And if you got enough money, well, even Jeb Bush can win races.
Well, he may have been more suitable for Florida than he was for a national race. And at the end of the day, he came into the race based upon his name and his brother's name, who had been president, and his father's name, who had been president, with a lot of money. But it's right, you're right, you have to have a combination of the right candidate, above all things, who has the right message and has enough money to be able to have credibility and then to communicate that message. So, I mean, I can tell you right now what Trump's message is. I'll bet you know his message right now.
He's going to make America great again. It's on his hat.
Message of growing the economy and trying to make the country safer and particularly confronting the international challenge that we have. It's too complicated. We need to have a message that communicates a thought in a way that grabs the emotion and the soul of the people of the United States. At the end of the day, I have good news for you. At the end of the day, through all this process, the people are still governing in this democracy.
Well, that I'm not so certain of. So, again, to button up the money issue. But nonetheless, Cruz is in the race because he got the $36 million from 4 donors in the first place, right? If he hadn't had that, he wouldn't have had the ability to compete with the Trumps of the world. And he did other things that were interesting, and I never counted him out. And I said, look, we got to watch out for that guy because, he's a zealot, in my opinion, in a lot of ways, but a populist that can, get a lot of grassroots attention in the Republican Party. But boy, that money helped. So what is it that whether they used it well or not, the Rubios and the Cruzes of the world doing to get that big donor money?
I think they've built a relationship over time. And, don't underestimate several points here. Each of the candidates has their own method for doing this, but the ability to build those relationships is much easier if you're a current office holder. In Ted Cruz's case, he developed those relationships by running for the United States Senate in Texas. In Rubio's case, he developed most of his key relationship by running for the United States Senate successfully in Florida. Bush is a little different. Bush already had that matrix in place from his brother and his father, and he was in a position to use that big structure that was based around that family. So that's a little bit different. And Trump's different because he has his own money. Bernie Sanders is different because he is drawing in apparently ideological money based upon a left-wing radical type of approach to government that frankly is radical and exciting and appealing to people.
This is why I asked you to come in, because I think you hit it right there. And that's, I was trying to figure out what it is. Why, if you're a former governor like Pataki or yourself, you just don't get as much attention. It's because your donor network isn't as fresh, especially those other current governors, Jindal, who I always thought was hilariously irrelevant, right? But he would get taken seriously because he's got a fresh donor base, especially post Citizens United. Let's get into Trump before we get to Sanders. Last time you talked with us, not with me, but our reporter Jordan, you said, I believe you used the word fascist in regards to Donald Trump. Was fascist tendencies or something along those lines, or saying that targeting Muslims, Mexicans, etc., that was going in that direction. Are you sticking by that? Do you still think that that's the right terminology and we should be duly concerned?
The Gilmore approach to politics is much more inclusive. As governor of Virginia, I actually tried to draw in the African American community into my administration and into the policy initiatives that I made. I boosted up the African American, historically black colleges in Virginia. As Attorney General, the African American community was being targeted by church burnings, and I took initiative to stop that and to make sure that didn't go on. And then I've tried to be much more open, and I believe in the philosophy the Republican Party has to be broader. And therefore, I disagreed with Donald Trump. I didn't want to call him a name, actually. What I tried to say was that I thought the approach was incorrect and was not right, and I stand by that. On the other hand, there are some things that he's doing right now which are pretty good.
Oh, really? That's interesting. Like what?
In order to really try to shake things up and to change things. He understands very well that the American people are not happy with the direction of the nation, and they want to see a change from that direction. He offers to actually make that change in a strong way. His foreign policy speech, which I attended, as a matter of fact, 6 times he said, I'm going to make sure that I put America's interest and Americans' interests first. He said it 6 times. That is a touchstone, and that's what the American people want.
What does that mean? So how does that play out? What are the consequences?
To me, it means that if we follow a foreign policy philosophy that says that what's good for other citizens around the world is also good for America, American people are no longer accepting that. He, in his speech, for example, 4 times talked about working people in this country who don't have jobs because their jobs have been taken overseas. That is highly responsive to the angers and fears and frustrations of the people in this country today. He talked about American humiliation. And I understand that point. That's a case where a man is working on the factory for 15 years and suddenly he's laid off because his job is taken to Mexico. Now you know what he's got to do? He's got to go home and tell his wife that he doesn't have a job anymore. He has to tell his child that he doesn't have a job anymore. And it's not just a matter of just money. It's humiliation. And Donald Trump spoke to that in his speech yesterday. 4 times he addressed the issue of American humiliation. So I think he's actually voicing something, Cenk, that's going on right now in the American society.
It sounds like you might be coming around to Trump, though. Would you support him if he's the nominee?
Well, I'm beginning to understand what he is doing and why I think that he is a legitimate voice in this country. The direct answer is that the state chairman of the Virginia Republican Party has asked me to head up to get out the vote for Virginia to carry the state for the Republican Party, and I've agreed to do that. And for that reason, I haven't endorsed any candidate at all. But I do expect her to support the Republican nominee because, Cenk, it's absolutely essential that Hillary Clinton not become the president of the United States.
So a guy that you were very, very concerned about in the beginning, Donald Trump, you now looks like he's going to be the nominee. And so you think he's a better choice than Hillary Clinton, and you're going to fight for him in Virginia.
Well, I'm going to stop Hillary Clinton no matter what, if I possibly can. And Virginia has not been in the Republican column for a while, and I think it's time to get us back into the Republican column if I possibly can. And I'm also campaigning in other parts of the country still. I actually only suspended the race. I haven't quit the race. And I was in Rhode Island last week campaigning extensively up there.
Really? I didn't know that. I mean, I got to be honest with you, and I'm sure the audience is thinking, what on God's green earth are you doing? Well, why are you in Rhode Island? I thought it was already over.
Well, it wasn't over then, but the point is I was trying to help. I was up there speaking and supporting fellow Republicans and meeting people and continuing to build networks and around the ideas of what I want to do for the United States and what I want to do for the...
So when you say helping fellow Republicans, you mean the ones in Rhode Island, but are you trying to help Cruz, Trump, Kasich, any of those guys, or you're neutral?
Not at this point. I am continuing to get around and talk about what I believe the right direction for the United States is right now, and that's what I'm trying to do.
So Boehner said, what was it, that Cruz is like Lucifer's something or other, right? He just said that a little while ago. What's your take on Ted Cruz? Lucifer-like or no?
I don't think I'm going to sit here and make an opinion like John Boehner did on any of these candidates while the race is still on and is still alive. But I haven't made any endorsements at this point.
Okay, fair enough. We'll stick with that. So now let's go back to Trump and his policy positions. So I look at that same speech that you're talking about. Sure, he hits those broad strokes. He's in essence channeling Oprah. I feel your pain, right? In a sense, but a completely different side of the spectrum. But when you go to, okay, well, what are you going to do about it? In foreign policy, my administration is going to be fantastic. I don't know what that means, right? He talks about killing the family members of the terrorists. That's illegal, and technically he should be arrested for that. Technically, I don't know if we ever arrest anybody anymore in power. But outside of that, I don't know what he's going to do. I know the illegal things he's going to do, but I don't know what positive action he's going to take. Did you get a sense of it that was clearer than I did?
There are some things that Donald Trump says that I don't agree with. And I'm, as you know, a former intelligence agent for the United States. I was stationed with NATO in Europe and spent a lot of time there. I spoke the German language there and was trained as a soldier as well. So I know my way around the world. I've traveled extensively around the world. I've studied the terrorist issues worldwide. And there are some things I don't agree with. I am very skeptical about torturing people. I don't think that's a good idea. And of course, the idea of targeting families is illegal. And so I don't think that you do those things. However, let me tell you what's going on here. What's going on here is a sense of frustration in the American people. They don't think that we're being strong enough against these horrible, barbaric people in the Middle East who are radical Islamists, not regular Islamists, but radical Islamists who are killing people and doing these dreadful things. And they are savages. And if they continue to spread this ideology through the 21st century, we would be taking a giant step backward to a savage wilderness type of world. And so he's speaking to that concern. He's speaking to that frustration, and that's really all I'm trying to tell you.
No, I understand that, and we're all frustrated by that. And I think the audience might be surprised at how much you and I agree on how to address that. I don't know about that, but okay, he's addressing that concern. But how? I mean, this guy is running for president of the United States of America. Not good enough to say, I have a secret plan. I mean, we've heard that before. That's nonsense.
No, I've heard that in the last several days and thought about it a lot, as a matter of fact. And I kind of went home and looked at his speech. And as I went through the speech, I began to understand the large themes that he was trying to speak to, which I have addressed here right now. The issue of Americans feeling they're not being put first. The feelings that they are humiliated by the current world that we live in that was brought to us by liberal policies. Okay. And so he's addressing that. But
what do you do about it?
There's plenty in his talks that explains what he's doing. And I think the left just doesn't want to accept that.
Okay, so what is it?
Well, first of all, he addressed ISIS and said that we were going to, in fact, be strong and decisive against ISIS.
But Governor Gilmore, I'm going to stop there again. No, what does that mean? What does it mean to be strong? Yes, I would like to be gargantuanly strong against ISIS, but what does that mean?
No point in arguing with me while I'm trying to say what I'm trying to say. No point doing that. The fact is, the guy's running for president of the United States. He's not running for lieutenant colonel of the 82nd Airborne, and he's not running for deputy undersecretary of something. He's running for president of the United States, and he's trying to explain to the people of this country, as did I, the general direction that we're trying to go. But he went through a whole line and list of those kinds of issues. He talked about China, Russia, Israeli policy. He talked about Hillary Clinton's failings. He talked about ISIS. He went through an entire list of those kinds of issues, as did I when I was speaking to these kinds of issues as a candidate for president of the United States. And I think the people of the United States are getting plenty of information to work on. If you're looking for how many soldiers or tanks we're going to send to North Iraq, I don't think that's the role of the president.
No, I'm not looking for that. I was actually looking for something very similar to what you said. And the strategy that you and I agree on, it appears, is special forces, more intelligence, and then winning the battle of ideas. So now that's a very specific plan. I view that to be a very logical plan. You and I, we certainly didn't coordinate that plan, but we happen to have the same exact one independently. So if a presidential candidate comes out with that plan, I can obviously respect it. I didn't get any of those specifics from Trump, who said, I'm not going to tell ISIS my plans, right? Yeah, but you're not telling ISIS, you're telling us, the American people. If you're going to run, we got to know, what are you going to do with them?
The fact is that if you're going to deal with the international situation, I've studied this, and I warn you and your viewers, there is trouble ahead on this. Make no mistake about it. There's no reason why we're not going to continue to see these kinds of attacks in the United States. So, therefore, I did put forward a plan as a candidate for president, similar to yours, that I think is very implementable.
So we're never going to be able to peer into the mind of Donald Trump and figure out what he means by strong, right? Because I think if you looked there, you wouldn't find much, to be honest. I don't mean that as an insult to his intelligence. I mean it in the sense that I don't think he's thought through what strong means. Okay, what would I do if I'm actually in the Oval Office? But you have thought it through. So other than what we just outlined, when you say we've got to be stronger against ISIS, what do you mean by that?
Against ISIS?
ISIS, yeah.
Well, as I said, I think that there will be a need to contain them in a particular geographical location. That's good, straight military talk. And that's frankly what Trump has said also. I believe that there's a sophisticated issue, though. And that is that you really can't just give them the role of being combatants on a battlefield. Because then if you just put your army against their army and you win, you really have won the military conflict, but not the war of ideas. I think we're going to have to actually try to capture these people and try them as war criminals and make the point to the people of the world that there are standards of civilized conduct in the 21st century that these savages are not obeying and that we stand for. And I think we can get a lot of help, by the way, from the Muslim world in this.
Now, let's turn to a part of Trump that we might disagree with. Now, you and I agree, based on what you've said in the past, about, hey, he shouldn't go after Mexicans, Muslims, and all the other groups that he goes after. having said that, isn't that really what the Republican Party was based on? And hear me out. You had the Southern strategy for at least 40 years. I had Pat Buchanan on my show on MSNBC, and I asked him about the Southern strategy, and he was part of the people who formed it under Nixon. And he said, yeah, we had a good run. Okay, now, two different heads of the RNC have apologized for the Southern strategy. It's real. It happened. And it was to gather, honestly, voters who didn't want blacks to have the same rights as whites, particularly in the South. So isn't Donald Trump an obvious extension of that? So we shouldn't really be shocked and chagrined that a Republican candidate would come out, be a little bit clearer in his xenophobia and racism, and get those same voters.
I don't even know what you're talking about. I'll be honest with you.
Really?
No, I don't even know what you're talking about. I think you're talking about politics as it existed many years ago, and people on the left are often guilty of this. They just can't move forward. It's just not 1960 anymore. It's now 2015. It is true that the South tends to vote more conservative than more liberal parts of the country. That is true. But to say that that's because somehow we're trying to keep ethnic people down or away is, frankly, just kind of old stuff.
Okay, so let me clarify the audience, because all the stuff you said about your outreach to African Americans in Virginia is true. Okay, so and you were the person who made Martin Luther King Day an individual holiday in Virginia.
Right.
Right. So that's to give you credit, right? But on the other hand, the Republican Party, all the way up until your governorship in the 1990s, didn't want to make it an individual holiday. They wanted it in with the leaders of the rebellion, obviously, General Lee, Stonewall Jackson, etc. Well, that was under your governorship that was still a position that was being held by the Republican Party. That's still being held in some parts of the South by the Republican Party today. In 2004, George Bush and Karl Rove make it a point to make sure they put gay marriage on as many state ballots as possible to run against gay marriage. So you know what I'm talking about. To say that the Republican Party is unfamiliar with this would be disingenuous. So now if you say, okay, we have gotten beyond it, that's a different point. But you know where it comes from. And you know that it's not something in the ancient past of 1960.
Boy, you're really stretching. I mean, you're working hard. I congratulate you, but it ain't working. I just don't think that the Republican Party in the South today is racially driven. I just don't believe that. I've been around the country. I've been around the South, and it just isn't true anymore. Now, I do believe the left tries to make that case in order to gather in African-American vote for the Democratic Party. But it's, for the most part, a fraud, and we really need to call the cat a cat.
So your position is clear on that, so I'm not going to keep pressing on that. But now, today, when we talk about not ancient past, but today, the guy who's leading the party and just won a whole heap of states with giant margins is Donald Trump, who is openly xenophobic and one would argue racist, an argument that you came close to making yourself earlier. So not in this interview, but in an earlier one. So obviously that's resonated with the Republican voters.
I think that there is a anger and resentment in the country today. I believe that anger and resentment, is economically based. I think people are afraid and frustrated. Their wages have not gone up now in many years. There are no great jobs. Young people are coming out of college without great opportunities for new careers. And as a result of that, there's an anger and a frustration. I do not agree at that point that you scapegoat people or look for outside people to blame. I believe the blame is internal. I believe the blame belongs with the left in this country, and especially as it's reflected by the Democratic Party. They are the source of this kind of problem. They are the source of this frustration. If Hillary Clinton becomes the president of the United States, she will double down on those policies and make things much worse until finally we will find a way to correct the situation. Maybe we can do it in 16.
Okay. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I hear you acknowledging that the current leading Republican candidate is scapegoating people and that that's not a productive way to go. Okay. So now let's turn to the left, who you think is causing the problems. Obviously, we're going to have significant disagreement there. So flesh it out for the audience. Why? Why is it the left that's caused these problems?
To the transfer of resources from one American to another. Americans who are working people understand this, and they're frustrated. America is about free enterprise. The Democratic Party today does not embrace free enterprise. America is about the creation of wealth so that you can then become independent on your own and even invest and do things for your children. The Democratic Party is not for that. They attack people all the time, as a matter of fact, who are in fact exercising their ability to gain advantages and to gain the ability to do things for themselves. The Democrats hate that. It's a much more sort of, it's kind of warmed over Marxism. And it's just very, very sick and not good for the country today. It's leading to this economic displacement, which is leading to great resentment. I certainly don't think that we should be allowing this to go on. The time has come to once again go back to the issues of liberty, freedom, free enterprise, the ability to invest and to succeed and to create wealth and to have some more freedom. And that's what the Republican Party should stand for, and I think does stand for.
So there's at least a dozen topics we can touch upon within that realm. But let's just do two or three, okay? So I think a candidate like Bernie Sanders would make the argument. Now, look, yes, I'm going to be very frank with you that I'm going to raise taxes. One of the reasons I'm going to raise it, for example, on the wealthy, is not because I want to punish them. This is his argument, okay? Not because I don't like them, and not because I don't believe in this system. It's so that I could use it for education, so that everybody, kids, all those guys that you're talking about that are angry and frustrated, that their kids have equality of opportunity, not result, opportunity. I'm going to give them a free college education. That doesn't mean I'm giving them a car or a phone or anything like that. I'm giving them the ability to, among other things, make an input into this economy and to help the economy. So what's wrong with that philosophy? Doesn't that make sense?
I paid special focus on education. I put 4,000 new teachers into the public schools in order to enhance the quality of education for everybody in Virginia. I paid a special emphasis on higher education. So I'm really very much supportive of education. But it is a very narrow view to suggest that by the destruction of the free market system and wealth creation in this country, that somehow that's going to mean better education. That's such a stretch. I don't even know how you make that connection. Here's the answer. Build up the economy, really exercise the free market system, stop all of the artificial impediments that are preventing the ability of entrepreneurs to create something, stop the high taxation in this country, which is just stifling all initiative, create more wealth, more opportunity. Then you have more money that you can put into proper forms like education or something like that. But right now, we have seen repeated attempts and efforts successfully to add taxation in order to stifle and to stop people from being able to invest and to create opportunities. The result is right now that young people who are watching your show right now do not have the opportunities they deserve in a free society. And it's being caused by the programs of the left in this country. And it's got to be defeated. And it's got to be defeated as soon as possible. 216 is not soon enough.
Okay, so let me counter with two things. One is anecdotal, but I think you'll find it interesting. The other is a matter of percentages. So the first one is the story of my father. So in Turkey, back when he was about to go to college, the taxes were higher than they are here today, right? And of course, it's a very complicated, depends on loopholes, etc. I understand all that. But they use that money to take the top 15% of test scorers in Turkey and give them a free college education. And my dad, who was an olive farmer down in southeastern Turkey, worked hard, studied hard, got in the top 15%, got a free college education. And I don't make that as a, hey, rah-rah for my dad. But what he did, and it's not even a matter of morality, is what he did is once he got out of school, he started his own company. And he wound up hiring over 100 people that worked. And you know what that did? That helped the economy. Then he came to America. He got his graduate education here. He started a small business here. Employed dozens of people here throughout the years. My point being there is if you raise taxes a little bit to pay for that free college education, it's not, oh my God, Marxism, redistribution of wealth, etc. It is, no, we're giving people an opportunity so that we help our economy down the road when there are more active people in the economy, creating jobs, creating small businesses, and we're unleashing them. Isn't that a fair point?
There's so many problems with that, I hardly know where to begin. First of all, there's no such thing as free education. Okay? There's just no such thing as free college education or any other education. It's paid for. It's paid for by somebody. Second of all, you can go after the wealthy in this country the way that Bernie Sanders does. There isn't enough money there to pay for everybody that everything wants. That's just this scapegoating. You know, you complain bitterly about and you accuse Donald Trump of scapegoating people, and you know that I would never adopt anything like that. Bernie Sanders does that, and so does Hillary Clinton. They just scapegoat different people. They just go back to their Marxist roots and say, well, it's a class society here, so let's go after the upper class. Let's go kill the czar. That's really what they're talking about.
No, they're not saying kill the czar. They're saying give our kids an education too. Give our kids an education too. That has nothing to do with killing the czar.
It does when you destroy the economy and you destroy the society in order to redistribute wealth. Create opportunities for people to have wealth, to earn wealth, like your father did. Create opportunities for entrepreneurship. Glorify in it. Don't condemn it the way that Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders do. They're so backward. They're trying to take the country so far backward, it blows my mind. We've got to do something.
So I have never really seen them, and I've covered this election through attack small businesses or entrepreneurs. What I've seen them do is say, especially Sanders, talk about crony capitalism. And that actually should be near and dear to conservative hearts. So, for example, when giant corporations or even rich individuals, and when I say rich, I'm talking about multimillionaires, billionaires, the donor class, etc., redistribute wealth in their own ways. So let me give you examples. This is what the percentages I was alluding to earlier. Back in the 1950s, corporations paid about 33 to 35% of all taxes in America. Now they pay in the ballpark of 10%. Now, where did that tax get redistributed to? To working poor and middle class, because it went to higher payroll tax. Okay, so now you know that hits the middle class harder than anything else, the payroll tax does. Okay, so through their ability to donate to politicians, they fixed the tax code, so they didn't pay the taxes anymore, but the average American did. You see, that isn't attacking wealth creation. That's actually attacking the redistribution of wealth that you say you're concerned about. It's just that it got redistributed to the top.
It's a very complicated argument, but I will say this. The best thing for us to do is to supercharge the economy, and that's what the Gilmore campaign was all about. Well, I want to supercharge the economy. We want to actually change the tax structure around the other way. What we want to do at this point is actually make it easier to invest in a business, to be able to get your write-offs back quicker. By the way, it's harder to do that now under the current laws than it used to be. The ability to actually put things together and create more and more wealth. Higher wages. Higher wages mean higher payroll tax, right? Which gives you more ability to have more resources in order to run the government, to do things like that. If I had one slogan for the Democratic Party is, by God, kill the goose that laid the golden egg. That's what the Democrats want to do, and that's what they are in fact doing. And I'm angry about it. I'm resentful about it because they dare to pretend to support the middle class and the lower classes when they are the source of the high unemployment that we're seeing and the underemployment that we're seeing.
When you say the goose that lays the golden eggs, I think my old friend Dylan Madigan, we used to work together at MSNBC, had a good point about this. A lot of the top corporations, and especially the banks these days, are not in the wealth creation business. They're in the wealth extraction business. And so part of that is the crony capitalism, where they go, here I'll give you more specific stats. Between 2010 and 2015, the top 200 corporations put in $5.8 billion into lobbying. Now, they didn't do that for their health. They're businessmen. They're looking for return on investment. And they know that, unfortunately, there's no better investment in America than buying American politicians. And they were right. In return, they got $4.4 trillion from the American government. Now, that isn't wealth creation. That's just crony capitalism. That's just getting the subsidies, getting tax breaks, getting all these advantages as to rig the rules in their favor. I think what the left is saying is, let's stop rigging the rules in the favor of these people who are able to donate to politicians. Let's have an actual free market.
Well, there are several things. First of all, I'm not going to get pushed into the corner of supporting lobbyists that rig elections or that rig politicians. I fundamentally and absolutely do not believe that politicians ought to be bought and sold. I think that they ought to do their duty and be prosecuted if they don't. So let's be clear about that. As for the $1 trillion, I don't know where that money went. You apparently do, but my hope would be that that is further capital to go back into the society for the purposes of investment and the creation of more jobs. By the way, I remind your viewers, more jobs mean fewer people, right, that are trying to fill more jobs, which means the wages have to come up in order to compete for workers. What we have today is the opposite. We have too few jobs, too many people trying to get jobs. As a result, we have young people with no jobs. We have young people with inappropriate jobs. We have people unemployed delivering pizzas when they've got bachelor's degrees. We've got people who right now are working part-time that want to work full-time. We have people who are insecure in their jobs, which Trump speaks to. We have people who are losing their jobs because of their going overseas, which Trump speaks to. These are the issues that have to be confronted in the society today. The Democratic policies are making things much, much worse. How long can this go on before the people of America revolt?
So on the idea of economics and taxes, let me ask just one last question. Now you run Free Congress Foundation, and if I've got it right, and correct me if I don't, you guys are in favor of a repatriation, a tax holiday, if you will, of corporations bringing money back in from abroad at a much lower rate. I don't know what you think that rate should be. 0. Okay. But we did that before. We did it in 2004. And the promise was, if you bring it in, and at the time I believe it was about 5%. So instead of 35%, you're going to pay 5%. So they made trillions of dollars off of that, right? If not trillions, certainly many, many billions of dollars in that one particular tax break. And they said, but don't worry, we'll create jobs. But they didn't. So the facts are in. We lost jobs from those specific corporations who got those tax breaks, and they created jobs in Vietnam, in China, and other places. But they didn't create them here in America. Isn't that the exact problem?
No. If cherry picking one issue and then blowing that up to, gee, it's a failure for the entire economic system were a valid argument, that would be one thing, but it isn't. With our program, we believe that that ought to be a component of an overall 4 or 5 step program which would supercharge the economy. And that is one piece of it. I can tell you from personal experience that the high tax rate in the United States is driving capital and jobs off to other countries. They just are. I know for a fact that in a global economy, American corporations must compete globally. With the high taxes in this country on capital formation, the ability to run a company, people can't compete with foreign companies that are paying lower taxes. And so they have to go offshore. And now you got all this money over there. For gosh sakes, let it come back and be reinvested back into companies. Now, look, I understand what you're saying. The companies are the bad guys. The big business people are the bad guys. The banks are the bad guys. All this warmed over Marxist crap. The fact is, that's what you're doing. The fact is that we have to enable capital to be able to form with freedom so that you can create growth and opportunity for the benefit of people in the middle class and the lower class. That's what you have to do.
And I'm not saying all bankers are bad guys. We talk about it on the show all the time. Of course, it's not true, right? But are there certain banks and certain corporations who are rigging the rules by influencing politicians so they do things like pay 0% taxes? Of course there are. Of course there are. So are those the bad guys who are redistributing the wealth to themselves and not to the American people? I would answer that with an affirmative, and significantly so. And then when you say, okay, well, they're going to bring the money back here, they're going to bring the money back here and put it into the executives' pockets. By the way, not the people who created the company. A lot of the people who created those companies were geniuses and great Americans and entrepreneurs. The guys who are now running those companies are the guys who know politics and know how to rig the rules. And then we know they didn't create jobs last time. And can you make any promise that those corporations, if you gave them your dream of a 0% tax, if they brought the money back in that particular case, would create any jobs? And you know they're not going to do that. You think they're going to guarantee any jobs here in America?
Most of the time, corporate executives are overseen by boards of directors and by the shareholders and by the newspapers. And if they're overpaid, usually that's exposed. The money actually usually goes back to the shareholders. Now, is that a sin from the left? I suppose that it is. But the fact is that if you don't create some opportunity for small people to have a place to invest their life savings in order to create some value, they won't invest. Investment, I want to say this, investment is the only thing that creates growth in a society's economy. You have to create opportunities for growth and investment. If companies can't actually create some return for people who invest, I'm talking about small people, not big people, small people to get some return, capital doesn't move, it doesn't form, jobs aren't created, corporations don't have a chance to grow, and you end up kind of like, Russia did back in the 1950s or something like that.
So I think our positions on this are clear. So let me end on the issue that we talked about earlier, which is this campaign finance system that we have. We privately finance our elections, and it appears that you seem at least somewhat concerned about that as well. I don't know to what degree you're concerned about it. I'm incredibly concerned about it. I don't want crony capitalism. I don't want somebody being able to give $1 million and then get favors in return. So what would be, if you are concerned enough to take action on that, what would be the action that you would take? How would you try to fix that situation?
The fundamental problem is that real money is being given to candidates by the networks and pretending that it isn't real money. The coverage for Donald Trump leading up to this nomination had a value, a cash value of about $1.9 billion. And even somebody like Jeb Bush couldn't compete with that. That's campaign contributions. And it's being decided by people we don't even know, and we have no idea what their philosophy is or their motives other than their own financial interests. So my solution would be, first of all, that be recognized as a campaign contribution. And if you're going to limit individuals' ability to support a candidate, which we do in this country today, in a dictatorial way, we say that you can't really support a candidate of your choice. If we're going to continue to do that, then I say the people with the real power, the people to reach into the television sets of people all across this country, the people who have the ability to really donate real airtime and real exposure to candidates and give them a real advantage, that has to be recognized as a cash contribution. It has to be regulated as such the same way we do individual citizens. And if you're not going to do that, at least report it, so the people of this country understand the advantage that's being given to certain candidacies. And that's, once again, a product of the modern era that we have to begin to recognize.
But would you limit any campaign contributions directly to politicians?
Well, the best form of today is to allow candidates to raise money and then to report that money. But today, with the limits that are on there now, really, unless you have private donors that you have a relationship with or your own personal money, it's very hard to compete in the United States today in politics.
Well, so we'll end on that somewhat agreement that free and fair elections would be wonderful in this country. Governor Gilmore, thank you for coming on the Young Turks and having a frank conversation with us.
What a pleasure. It's really been a joy.